The 56th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum officially opens today in Davos, Switzerland, under the theme A Spirit of Dialogue. Leaders from government, business, civil society, science, and culture will gather to tackle some of the world's most pressing challenges, from climate change and energy security to technological innovation and economic inequality. Joining us this morning ahead of the official start is Dr. McKinley, who is a political economist, to give us insight into what to expect, including Africa's role in the discussions. Dr. McKinley, thank you for joining us. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Asanda. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. The World Economic Forum in Davos is often seen as a gathering of global elites. In a world that's facing a number of things, including rising inequality, technological disruption, and geopolitical tension, why does this kind of meeting still matter, particularly for Africa?
Well, it matters because it's gathering the world's leaders and particularly the world's biggest economies. And on top of that, I think probably about the majority of the top corporations in the world. So basically, the people who run the world economy, people who control a lot of the trade, and who we have relationships with, both in Europe and the United States in particular, but also Asia, are going to be there. So I think that's what makes it important. Now, the gathering versus actually what happens at the World Economic Forum are two different stories, and particularly this year because of obviously the presence of Donald Trump and his very powerful United States delegation, which is coming in on the back of, of course, you have to find it quite ironic that the overall theme is about dialogue, and yet we started off the year with an invasion of a country and the kidnapping of a sovereign country's leader to go back to the United States, and of course, indications that the United States wants to take over Greenland and all sorts of other things. So it's taking place within a context unusually where the kinds of dialogues and the kinds of conversations that are going to be happening, I think, are going to be a bit different than in past years.
Well, as Africa participates at Davos, is the continent really shaping part of the agenda, or will we just be responding to what's already been placed in front of us and priorities that are already set?
It's going to be a little bit of both. I think we are Africa, and this is obviously, you saw it from the G20 process last year, is trying to get its seat on the table and to have a bit more of a role in the conversation about setting the global trade agenda, sort of equalizing relationships and so forth. In that case, we're not in the driver's seat. We're trying to get as being part of the driver's seat. But where Africa does have some cachet, has some power behind it, is the fact that two different things. One is that South Africa, not just South Africa, but Africa itself is amongst some of the fastest growing areas in the world. In other words, our continent is projected, particularly East and West Africa, to have economic growth that is quite outpacing many other places in the world. This provides economic opportunities for our continent. And I think that places Africa in a fairly decent situation to have those kinds of conversations about new economic possibilities. The second one is the fact that our continent is the repository of a great deal of natural resources, and particularly rare earth minerals and other kinds of resources that are needed for the new AI technological revolution and the driving of the the going off the fossil fuel grid. So in that context, we are fairly well strategically placed, at least in that, having those kinds of resources to play a more meaningful role in setting some of the terms of that trade agenda or getting better terms.
How can African countries play that role? As you mentioned, AI and the next generation energy systems are on the agenda. As a continent, how do we leverage these technologies, and what challenges do we face in catching up where we need to?
Well, the challenges that we face are the fact that most of the countries on our continent are fairly heavily in debt. We are also very heavily behind in infrastructural development, in providing the necessary frameworks and the foundations for taking off and surely taking advantage of this gap that is sort of here, or the space that is here, and also for the human capital that is necessary, and the money capital that is necessary to drive this kind of growth is also generally lacking in most of our continent. So our challenge is to access that, is to be able to change also the domestic situations in many countries. There's too many conflicts, there's too much instability, political instability. There's still, I mean, we've just seen, for example, a couple of the elections on our continent, which have been very controversial and do not provide, if you're an investor or if you're someone who's thinking of looking at a country, that's what you're looking for. So in that context, I think those would be our key challenges. What can Africa do in the context? Well, it can be much more unified. The worst thing that Africa can do is to come as individual countries and try to negotiate individual deals or sort of treat it as if they're on their own. We need to act as a bloc. Economic blocks, we already have those blocks on our continent, the East African bloc, the West African one, the Southern African one, but they tend to be a bit weak when it comes to negotiating the terms of new trade deals and new kinds of growth opportunities. So it's about unifying that, having a common message, and about leveraging our advantages, which require political will and a particular economic plan, which sometimes are weak because our political classes are too often more interested in accumulating for themselves than they are in pursuing the national interest.
South Africa is part of Davos, or Davos every year. So, what should the country be aiming to achieve, especially on the point you made previously about regional integration and a grouping of outlooks for Africa?
Sure, I think South Africa, we can position ourselves as obviously we are one of the most sophisticated economies on the continent, the largest economy on the continent, minus maybe Nigeria and Egypt. And so we can position ourselves as a regional, driver of these kinds of things, as somewhere where you can base yourself. And this has always been sort of the role, or at least the purported role of South Africa. But I think now, look, the South African delegation is going to be touting some of the gains, or some of the improvements, should we say, that they are going to say have taken place in our country over the last 2 or 3 years, particularly with regards to the financial architecture. If you remember, getting off the gray list in the task force, the financial task force. Also, some of the infrastructural developments with regards to energy, transport, ports, electricity. So what we can do is we can start saying that we could act as a new regional driver of this kind of growth, that we have both the political and the economic power in order to do that, even though that might be quite debatable at the moment. But nonetheless, I think that's what you would try to sell there. But also, I think we need to continue to play a role as the voice of a global South, as a voice of our continent, to try to continue, irrespective of the difficulties, to get a better deal, to get a bigger voice at the table, to continue to push that more developmental agenda that is oftentimes ignored at the bigger corporates and countries, and to try to say that, if we want as a world to move beyond conflict and constant, competition, that we're going to have to drive a more developmental agenda, and we're going to have to drive a more equal one, which I think is a good message, and one that South Africa is somewhat still, despite our difficulties, still quite well positioned to carry forward.
Dr. McKinley, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for your valuable insights.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Sanda.
Great. Dr. Dale McKinley is a political economist sharing his insights on the World Economic Forum, which gets underway in Davos today. That gathering being themed a spirit of dialogue, leaders from all over the world meeting there to discuss the world's most pressing issues. Among them, as we discussed with Dr. McKinley, AI and the next generation energy technologies and solutions, as well as growth, innovation, and sustainability. Those three major focus themes for that gathering.